Hello conservationists, and welcome back to Chapter 8, Ecosystem Degradation Loss Part 2. So in Part 1, we defined HIPCO, the ways that we can have ecosystems degraded and lost, and we looked at specifically pollution. So in this chapter, we're going to go through more causes of ecosystem degradation, as well as we'll see those in later chapters. So we're going to look at structural changes, physical environment changes, we do deforestation and fragmentation. Okay. So first, structural changes. So these are structures that we put up that can cause change of how animals move. They can get run over. It affects the way that they can spread their genes. So gene flow, that's big. Remember, if populations, groups of individuals of the same species breeding together, don't get new genes in from other individuals emigrating in, you'll have more inbreeding, which can lead to more recessive diseases and less genetic variety. So that's bad. Okay, so first let's look at roads. So this is a picture from either Yosemite or Yellowstone where they put up signs everywhere that someone hits a bear and kills them. They put up signs that shows that each year. When I went through, I think I saw 5 or 6 signs just in the limited part of the park that I went to. So killing individuals is probably the most extreme issue for structural changes, but it can also affect how species move, where they put their nests, all of which have negative effects on the ecosystem and the biotic factors there, as well as sometimes the abiotic. This is an example from Tanzania where the park doesn't have roads, so not one area gets used over more than the others, so there's like less damage caused by vehicles. But again, that only works as long as you don't have too many vehicles going through. Okay, so a really big issue for freshwater rivers is dams. And so what you see in a normal flowing river is that you've got fish that can move along the whole part of it. You'll have current going down at a pretty constant speed based on the season and rainfall. It mixes up the water. Sediment and nutrients can travel in a normal manner. Fish can spawn or release their eggs. And then you have this natural temperature regime, so it doesn't get too hot or cold in an area. But what happens when you put a dam in is that you change the flow of water downstream, and then you have a lake form here. And so all this sediment that's rushing down builds up in this area and doesn't keep going. It can also cause fish not to be able to move up the dam, so if they need to move up to spawn, they can't. Another really big thing is that fish need a very specific water temperature and flow rate to spawn at, and if they don't get that, they won't spawn. They won't lay their eggs and produce the next generation. So that changes the total flow. When I was in California, I saw some really cool things that they did for salmon. Because salmon can't make it up all the dams, they'll have these like river side parts where it's like this, it's called like a fish ladder, where there's little pools of water getting higher and higher where they can make that jump over and get back to their native pond or stream. Cool. Another one is fences. So here's some elephants, and you can see there's a couple that have been radio collared. Let's just go right to that. They're African elephants. Their ears are large in the shape of Africa, and they're going through a fence. I did my master's research in Addo Elephant National Park in South Africa. It was on the southeastern Cape, and we had about 500 elephants in a space that generally wouldn't hold that many, and they would only be there for a little bit, and then they would move on. But because they're fenced in, unless they break out and can cause damage that farmers get upset about, they are in an area that's too small, they don't get to migrate, and so all the vegetation there just constantly gets eaten. You don't get a break. If you go by the water hole, if you look at it from above, it looks like a bomb has gone off because elephants have eaten all the vegetation within that area around the water hole. And then specific species that elephants like better, like prickly pear, you can't find in the areas that elephants are in because they eat it all. So you mostly have this like acacia brush with thorns. And canals are another big one. When we looked at bioremediation, we looked at canals because when you make a canal, you don't have vegetation in there filtering out pollutants, taking out some of the nutrients. So you'll oftentimes have a lot of pollution in there. And that's totally changed the flow of water in that area. A fun thing that they do in Minnesota is sometimes you'll see what are called living snow fences. So basically, they use plants to help block the wind and reduce the snow that's falling and blowing onto the road. Okay, now let's look at some physical environment changes that we make, where we're changing the abiotic factors, those non-living ecosystem factors that affect the biotic. So we'll look at erosion, fire, and water. Okay, so soil erosion is a really important issue. You can see here that this area is getting eroded out at a really quick rate. And this oftentimes happens in areas where we used to have a lot of trees and we've taken them out. Because what trees do is they have really thick roots that help hold the soil down, and like long grass prairie is another great example. Their roots go really deep into the soil, so they help filter water, hold nutrients, hold that soil there. But if you take them out and you put in grass like from your backyard, that's called fescue, its roots are really thin, and it doesn't hold on to soil or water, it doesn't filter, it doesn't take in pollutants and fertilizer very well. And so then that all gets washed out into our water table and the soil gets pushed out. That's why when you see like a big area that's lawn that gets mowed all the time that you don't actually use for anything, it's incredibly damaging to the ecosystem. We've replaced these plants that have higher nutritional value, that help support more biodiversity, and replaced it with a plant that we just think looks nicer or is what the standard is for being a good homeowner in this time. Another big issue can be roads and how the water flows off of them, construction, agriculture. So there's not actually specific laws in most states on how agricultural runoff moves and how the water moves off of it, which can be very damaging. And so then that eroded soil moves down and it covers, blankets other ecosystems and decreases the productivity. So basically how much photosynthesis is going on, how much biomass we're growing, how much plants are growing, how many animals are supported. And we've hit water use a bit before, but we take water out of the ecosystem for our own use. Big ones are agriculture. Oh, fun fact there. One of the things that the Kentucky Fish and Wildlife Program has done is called the CREP program. And what they do is they will put like a layer of biodiversity around agriculture so that there's a way that species can move through the area. But another thing that they've done is they've planted gamma grass instead of that fescue. And so what that does is it doesn't look as pretty. I'll pull up a picture for you. So there's the fescue grass, the lawn that you're used to. Now let's look at gamma grass. Okay, so this is a much bushier grass. It's not necessarily pretty, but I think it's nice because I know how well it works. And it has deeper roots, it's more nutritional, so that some farmers with cows here will have their cows eat this instead. And when it really was important was during a drought. And then farmers were having to ship in hay. It was really expensive and they had to get it from far away. But the other farmers that had the gamma grass were good. It's drought resistant, it holds water better. Their cows had more to eat, which is pretty interesting. Okay, cool. We use a lot of water in our home. And you might be surprised, but in general, the biggest water use in our house is our toilets and flushing them. And so at our house, we have this saying, if it's yellow, let it mellow, which isn't super fun, but it helps us save water and reduce our carbon footprint and the damage that we're doing. There's the world water use. The darker the blue, the more water use per person. You can see where that's the darkest. And you might say, hey, who cares? Water is incredibly economically viable. When we have climate change and we're like, well, someday we'll deal with it, we are right now. So 2012 was a drought year, and you can see the billions of dollars that climate change and drought year cost us. So next, let's look at deforestation. This is also an incredibly huge issue. So deforestation is exactly what you would think it would be, like taking out forest. And that's incredibly important because forests in general are huge areas of biodiversity. And we are losing them at a much faster rate than we are growing them. A big issue for that is that we have ecological overlap, where we want to use that space for people, for agriculture. And here you can see the levels of deforestation of different countries. Like Brazil has lost 3 million, almost 3.5 million hectares, which a hectare is 10,000 square acres. So to put that in perspective, like the park that I was at, right there, it was about 14,000 hectares in one part, 23,000 in another. So now let's look at deforestation, which is exactly what you think it is. It's taking forest and removing it, replacing it with industrialization like housing or shops, using that as trees for wood, burning it, and then using it for agriculture, mining, etc. So there's a lot of damage that this can do. And let's look at this picture to kind of summarize what those are. So before industrialization and habitation, this was all forest, right? And so now there's been deforestation. We've replaced some of that with agriculture, some with roads and houses, right? Okay. Well, what you see now is, A, there's less forest. So there's less area for forest. And so you've got some patches that are really small, right? And not only is there less area, but some of them are, like this one, are totally isolated. So if you have a squirrel in here that wants to get over to this space and maybe mate with other squirrels to bring out more genetic diversity, it has to cross through this open space. Okay. So if you go outside anywhere in Kentucky today and you sit out at a pasture or farm, what you will see over time is a hawk. Oftentimes a red-tailed hawk, for example. And so they'll sit there and they have great eyes. Anything that tries to cross this space, any small rodents, for example, they will go down and eat. So those species take huge risks trying to cross. We've isolated them and there's less space for them overall. And so nature is inherently kind of patchy. You've got like different areas. There's going to be water, example, but anthropogenic disturbance. So anthro means human. So it's basically human-caused disturbances result in very different and usually less hospitable landscapes than what happens through natural causes. So here's an example where we've got 500 years and 1,000 years and the different types of species there. But if you were to do a clear cut where people just like take all the wood, you would see those species get to be replaced and it would look totally different than what would happen naturally. Okay, so this is a really great figure showing what we can do to make things better. Right? So if we've got a small space, making it bigger and bigger and bigger is better. And so what you'll notice that's also happening is it's getting more circle. The more middle space away from the edge, the better. Because a lot of species don't like the edges. They're not nesting there. They're not using that area. So the more middle you have, the more space for those middle species, right? Whereas here, if you're a bird that doesn't like to nest towards the end, you can't even use this space, even though it might be the right type of trees, right? But you can use this. And then this is showing with the road, making the road more narrow, taking it out, making an overpass. There's some really cool things that they do in Canada where they can make corridors that nature can use. I think they also use those in like Scandinavia. And species do use it. Although an interesting fact there was predators also figured out that species use it. There was also a tunnel made between parks for elephants, and they were like, elephants are never going to find it because they know what everything is, they're not going to see it, but they found it right away. It's just really cool. So this is a very chaotic area, making it less chaotic and closing it is better. And so in this last one we have two patches that aren't connected. So here we make this connection or corridor. Corridors are very important. And the bigger the corridor, the better, right? So in this space, these corridors are helpful because they give species a safe way to move between patches. They're very important. Okay, so here we have an example of what highway rebuilds have to go through to look at what they're doing to conservation issues like habitat fragmentation. So what they do is they look at the habitat, they look at the corridors and the patches. Are there good corridors? Are there big enough patches? And what do we need to do to help with that? Okay. So the next topic that we have is biogeography. This is a topic that is actually so important that it is one of our course competencies. So if you need to know what you need to know for this class, this concept, this topic was its own one of the 8 things you got to know from this class. So I really want to stress that you should understand this. And the reason that island biogeography is really important is because you can take what you learn about islands and apply them to patches on land. So, right, islands are these patches of habitable ecosystem, and then there's space between them. Same thing with fragmentations on land. And so what island biogeography looks at is it looks at the size of the island, so that's one part, and the distance from other islands. Okay. And it also looks at then immigration, individuals coming in, emigration, individuals going out, and extinction. Okay. So if you were just told an island is 10 miles across and another island is 1 mile across, based on their size, which one would you guess had more biodiversity? Well, I would hope you would guess the big one, right? Because if there's more space, there's probably more types of life, right? And then the harder part is the distance from other islands. So if you have 2 islands that are closer together, they're more likely to have more biodiversity because they can have more emigration and immigration. Whereas if they're farther, it's harder to have things move. There's less gene flow. There's going to be more extinction. So now let's read this map. Okay, we've got the numbers of species present down here, or the amount of biodiversity. And then we've got the immigration versus extinction. Okay, so the least amount of species present is a small island far from land. And that makes sense. It's small, there's less space. It's far, there's less immigration. Right? In the middle, about the same amount of biodiversity. We have a large island that's farther and a small island that's nearer, right? And then the islands with the most biodiversity are big islands near other land. You've got enough space and you've got gene flow. So an example here looking at the Galapagos Islands is we've got the amount of area and the number of species, and these are log form. And so what that means is that every change in one is actually 10 times the amount of space. And so that's 10 times the amount of species, 100 times, 1,000 times. But by doing it by log, it makes it look really nice, right? So we've got this huge amount of difference and variation mapped on a small graph. And what you'll find is the more area, the more species present. And here in Papua New Guinea and the islands off of that, we've got the distance that they are from land and the number of species. So more species when they're closer to other land. So desertification is losing our ecosystem because we're losing water and having it become desert. So the desert ecosystem on its own is great. But when we're taking forests and they're drying out and becoming desert, not so great. Right? We have less water retention, less productivity, lots of soil erosion. And if you remember from a previous chapter, we talked about how if water leaves and there's still the same amount of salt, it's saltier. There is a great TED Talk that you should watch. I've got it listed. It's Alan Savory looking at one possible way that we can combat desertification. Great. Okay. 20 minutes in. Have a great day.